Well, thank you, President Faust, for being with us today and for your generous introduction and kind words about the school. Thank you, Phil, John, and Michael. We deeply appreciate all you've done for the school and all that you're doing for our campaign. It has been a pleasure, a great pleasure, to work with President Faust on several projects since I became dean. She already mentioned a couple of them. The Harvard Committee for the Arts, which of course has brought a much higher level of prominence within the university to the arts, and the Committee on Common Spaces, which has really helped to investigate how we can create a feeling of community within the Harvard campus. President Faust, as we know, is very much committed to One Harvard. And it's making a huge difference for us at the GSD. Our future is intertwined through collaboration with the other schools and faculties within the university. Many of these have already mentioned. We believe in One Harvard, and we aspire to making it a reality. We work to connect with other parts of the university through our projects, linking with the schools of engineering, public health, the Ed School, the Law School, the Business School, the Kennedy School, the Wyss Institute, the iLab, and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. President Faust, we are so deeply happy to have you with us. As we celebrate design as part of the university's campaign, thank you for everything you've done for the GSD. And we welcome all of you, visionaries, alumni, friends who have gathered to mark this milestone in the life of the GSD. The architects, landscape architects, urban designers, and planners who teach and learn here are visionaries in that they think big, imagining alternative futures. But we also know how to implement, embedding our vision in a complex global society. That is how we achieve grounding. And throughout, our goal is a better world, a more humane world, and yes, a more beautiful world. Are we successful in living up to these values? As you have heard from President Faust, the answer for the past 75 years has been a resounding yes, and that is all because of you. What is it that makes the GSD unique? First and foremost, though there are many universities that have, for example, schools of architecture, there are really very few that we can truly call as schools of design. We at the GSD look holistically at our work. Not only do we design buildings and landscapes, we look at how these combine with planning to create the total urban fabric that incorporates social, cultural, and economic realities. It is no accident that this has happened. This was part of the vision of the beginning when, as we already heard, Joseph Hudnut, Walter Gropius, and the other early leaders of the schools saw the power that would be created through an interdisciplinary pedagogy that brought all of these disciplines under one roof. We understand the power of design. We claim design as a field of expertise that integrates architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, and planning. We recognize design as a catalyst for change with a strong social dimension. We make things that matter. We create structures and environments that have lasting effects on the quality of life for millions of people. We champion and practice transdisciplinary learning and doing. We constantly explore a variety of pedagogic possibilities, option studios, studios abroad, and field studies. These are increasingly collaborative, engaging experts across the university and beyond. As President Faust mentioned, we also collaborate across the university. It is in our DNA. This is consistent with our work in the world because working on responses to climate change is more effective when we partner with the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. This is why we're pursuing the possibility of a collaborative degree together, or when we work with the School of Public Health on a research project that addresses issues of health in urban environments. And of course, with the Kennedy School, we share faculty, a joint degree, and a joint center for housing studies. And more recently, as was mentioned, with the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the undergraduate track in architecture studies. Our new Center for Green Buildings and Cities and our research labs and projects are equally focused on problem solving and speculative thinking. We ask what needs to be done today and what might be our possible futures. We're global citizens. We are increasingly going out into the world through our studio program, sending faculty and students to as many as 45 countries in 2 years to become a part of the local environment, to learn from the people there, and to contribute to their lives. More than half of our option studios are international. These forays are critical, but to be effective, we must also be at the vanguard of disciplinary knowledge. It is this combination of knowledge and global purpose that shapes the work of the school. We value work of the highest caliber and highest quality. Focusing on the social dimension is laudatory but incomplete if it compromises the aesthetic and the formal dimensions of disciplinary knowledge. Again, as President Faust mentioned, the GSD is equally committed to social impact and design excellence. This excellence is grounded in research. It has been a priority during my time here at the GSD to develop and expand our research program with a focus on critical global issues and the capacity of the imagination. We strive for sustainable outcomes. Our work has consequences for people and communities at a variety of scales and in a variety of contexts. At the local scale, the GSD's participation in the Common Spaces program helped the university reconsider the yard as a place rather than a path of circulation, a locus. The chairs in Harvard Yard are a simple yet spectacular example of the power of design to act as an instigator of change. And of course, as has been the transformation of the newly envisioned plaza in front of the Science Center. These projects are an affirmation of inclusion by the university for the whole community. This action at the local level is important to our designers who are reshaping the environment in our own backyard. At the larger scale, the GSD's response to a global triple threat in Japan, earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster, has taken on a different form. This is a long-term project that continues to engage students and faculty across a variety of formats. Toyo Ito led a studio abroad in Tohoku. A multidisciplinary student team won a competition for their proposal to help rebuild and recover from the disaster. And our students continue to visit the region doing independent research and summer community service work. This is precisely the long-term, global, and influential work that this campaign supports and envisions. And now, tonight, here, we welcome and celebrate you for who you are and what you do, bringing the ideals of the Graduate School of Design into the real world of cities and towns, suburbs, and the countryside. Thank you all for being here. Thanks. Who better to share with us ideas and projects at the interface of research and design than our speaker tonight, Rem Koolhaas. In so many ways, Rem represents everything I've been describing here tonight. For decades, he has embodied the ideal of the design professional whose practice constructs a body of knowledge that is both broad and deep. Rem is a professor in practice of architecture and urban design at the GSD, and he's also a practicing architect. Since 1991, he has exemplified the balancing of teaching and practice to the benefit of generations of our students. I feel lucky to count him as a friend, to have him as a friend. Our friendship goes back a long way. It has included conversations, projects, and memories that are also linked to many geographies. Locations as varied as London and Rotterdam, Ithaca and Taipei, New York City and Cambridge, and of course Venice, but more about that in a minute. Please welcome Rem Koolhaas.
When I first came to America in 1972, the urban condition in America was very different from what it is now. What you see in this picture would happen every day, and if you went out of the city, you came into a nothingness, which at the time was not unbearable, actually more or less exciting, and nobody felt that design had a role to play. You would see this kind of image, obviously of a man, and you would know that within the next 12 hours something exciting would happen to him, but you didn't know exactly what. And today we have an entirely different life. We are much more interested in comfort, security, and sustainability. So if we see a man from behind, we know more or less what is going to happen tonight, and it's not going to be particularly exciting. When I began teaching in the GSD, this was the kind of city which was going up in America, and this was the kind of city that was going up elsewhere. And I became very concerned that the kind of city that went up here was so different from what went up elsewhere that it became necessary to understand this other city, because the only way in which you could measure this in terms of that would inevitably make you very negative about the new and different condition. Our profession also in the mid-90s had stopped making and writing manifestos almost completely, and there is a kind of tragic drawing here. While America and Europe grew, we were writing enormous amounts of manifestos. When Asia exploded, we stopped writing manifestos, so I felt that at the moment of the apotheosis of the urban condition, the thinking about the city had reached a kind of point zero. At that moment, I began to think that the typical condition of a thesis student, where an individual kind of identifies a subject of her interest and then confronts it with intellectuals who more or less tortured, try to cultivate to a higher level of wisdom, was perhaps a bit outdated, and that what I was particularly concerned with is that I very often attended, for instance, juries that were about an abandoned harbor pier in Boston Harbor, and while the students were from countries where harbor piers were never abandoned, and so therefore it seemed that there was emerging a misfit between the content of the university and perhaps the contents of the world. And so for that reason, and Harvard was incredibly generous in supporting this idea, for that reason I began to kind of think that perhaps students could be seen as experts, and in certain cases students definitely kind of knew a lot more than myself. For instance, Chinese students knew Chinese, economist students knew economy, and formerly communist students knew communism. And all those ingredients were extremely important to begin to understand China, where I had never been before. So by, in a way, a position of humility toward the new subjects, and on the other hand, a position of interest and curiosity supported by the expertise of the students, we were able to look for the first time at new conditions that had never been incorporated or thought about in the curriculum of Harvard. And became clear that in China something, for instance, it was not the only interest of course, something totally different was happening. For instance, this is planning in China. You can see that planning is a kind of wishful thinking. It's not based on reality, not on objective needs. It's simply an articulation of a will that eventually may be kind of realized or may be plausible, but not at the moment of its initiation or its first realization. Cities in China were growing at such incredible speed, and architecture was growing at such incredible speed that the slowness of the architectural apparatus was clearly slowing it down and was impossible to maintain in the face of this kind of new condition. And here, fortunately, it was the same time that Photoshop emerged, and here you see a new condition of planning in China. Basically, planning in China was combining two things you liked in a single image. A golf course and a house electronically or digitally combined. And this situation could actually also work for a city, where you see the city of Shenzhen, its main intersection, less than 400 yards removed from the rice fields. So again, there's countryside and there's metropolis, and the two could be seamlessly combined in a single image. The second element that we went to look into happened after I kind of studied the curricula of all Ivy League schools and realized that in 40 years there had never been a program on shopping. And that at the same time, if you looked at the economy, that the market economy was increasingly dictating life, and that therefore there was a strange discrepancy between these two observations. What we realized when we traced the history of shopping, that it of course started very simple with markets, shopping streets, eventually department stores, but that we were now facing a completely new situation where shopping had infiltrated literally every aspect of life, every activity known to man, and was actually in many cases supporting activities such as hospitals, airports and others, so that it was no longer a separate entity, but something that was deeply ingrained in every other activity, and that somehow we had not thought about the technologies that were necessary to create shopping as we know it now, but that we also had not really paid attention as architects that shopping created a completely mutant kind of architecture, namely an architecture that, thanks to air conditioning and other facilities, grows and grows and grows, so that a building is no longer a contained structure, but actually an almost endless facility. When we looked at shopping, also we realized for the first time that the digital was going to play a massive role, and that our cities had already been analyzed and kind of represented in very harsh realities where income and absence of income were mapped very precisely, so that the positioning of a shopping center could be more precise than it had ever been. And it is actually strange that even 20 years ago, when we first looked at the effect of data on the city, how much more secret big data have become since these moments where the digital was still a tool. In the same way, I felt that we were not knowing or not understanding at all conditions in poor combinations of poverty and metropolis. And I decided to go with the students, and here again it was very courageous that Harvard allowed them to, with the students to the city of Lagos in Nigeria, which at the time was notorious and almost inaccessible in terms of its life. We matched each Harvard students with a Nigerian student so that they kind of operated as teams and went into the streets of Lagos trying to understand how cities could coexist with extreme poverty and what the effect on the culture of such a city was. We went on the ground. This is at first sight kind of garbage dump, and in order to really understand, we did not only search on the ground, but we also hired the helicopter of the Nigerian president and looked from above so that we could match the incredible myopic and chaotic image in front of us with a more sober overview of what was actually happening in the city. And here you see a village that is built on top of a rubbish dump so that the inhabitants can quickly sort out and work and earn a living by selecting kind of different elements on this rubbish heap. What we did was for some people shocking because of course it was considering Africa as a creative entity. It was even considering Lagos as a very creative entity and not necessarily as a kind of city of victims. And the victim view, of course, is embedded in the kind of Western condition. So when I took this picture here and kind of presented it as, in fact, a work in progress, you see kind of people here and there, and you see that basically they are sorting like and like. You see here is a kind of mountain of one material, a mountain of a different material, so that in spite of the incredible chaos of this image, we are actually dealing with sorting, selection, a rational process and a creative process because it enables you to have a life. Then it was in some ways a kind of shocking situation or shocking reception in the West. What we could only conclude after all these very different experiences is that the city, perhaps as it had been under the Romans, namely a single template that could be kind of applied almost everywhere and would be based on kind of minor eccentricities, that the city, as it had been kind of imagined by Le Corbusier in Paris, to the horror of the architecture profession who rejected in Europe and the West this whole idea of the tabula rasa, that exactly that city was becoming the dominant city in the world. And therefore, that there was a massive discrepancy between what we as architects think that cities are about and the kind of reality that the city is. Because here you have a kind of random sequence of cities. It doesn't really matter where they are, but the only conclusion that you can draw from it is that this book, a beautiful book and a great book about the specificity and of small-scale urban life, was no longer what was relevant to our conception of the city. And so what we tried to do, and we did it mostly in an exhibition in 2001, which was called Mutations, where we asserted this insight that the city would probably had changed irrevocably, would probably never become the same as it had been. Of course, old cities continue to exist, and they're wonderful. But that what we needed is a new repertoire and a new series of tools to begin to work in a kind of similar situation. This has now become more or less a cliche. Everyone talks about it more or less in the same term. So for that reason, recently I've begun to look at architecture itself. We felt that our investigation of the city could be said to have concluded. We had, in a way, changed the paradigm, perhaps, of what a contemporary city is. And I felt that at this particular moment, architecture is in a kind of similar situation. It has changed incredibly, and it is about to change incredibly, and that kind of somehow we were not exactly aware or not exactly informed of those changes. So with, again, a group of wonderful Harvard students, for the first time we investigated architecture and called that investigation Elements of Architecture. We looked at the floor, the door, the wall, the ceiling, the toilet, and all those basics. We did not know whether it would work or whether it went somewhere, but after a kind of first test, we kind of realized that yes, maybe it would be interesting. And at that moment, I decided to make that particular exhibition. We still had a year to develop it kind of further. The mainstay of an exhibition that we did in Venice. I leave some other stuff out now. And so in June this year, we opened the exhibition and published a number of catalogs, one catalog for each elements that eventually will be consolidated in a single kind of almost encyclopedic book. The reason that also in architecture I felt as uncomfortable as I had felt in the 90s about our conception of the city is that this image could be said to be a kind of typical image in a school of architecture. And this is a factory that kind of describes the robotic tool, that fabricates the robotic tools with which architectural elements are made. So the discrepancy between these two, between the kind of highly individualistic, even though kind of probably defined by through digital technologies, and the kind of robotic effort and efficiency that will be kind of mobilized against it is extremely daunting. And of course, I also felt that we architects are extremely naive about the implications of the digital, because we see it as a kind of new and wonderful way of form making and of kind of breaking through the rigidities of our aesthetic. But those rigidities are prepared for us in no uncertain ways by other means. So basically, you know, we were working in a kind of Italian pavilion and dedicated to each of the element, kind of single room, and each of these rooms basically reported on changes, reported on history, but also reported on tipping points where an element had kind of turned from one architectural element to a machine, such as the elevator that turns a staircase into a machinery, or other kind of mutations, and where we are also indicating or exploring where and in which direction these elements would go. We had an introductory room with a movie, a 30-minute movie, that was simply a selection from films about elements only, and what it kind of showed is that each element, if you look at it in isolation, is actually frightening and kind of slightly uncanny. And that is, for instance, if you take the ceiling, what we had to explain and what we have seen in the ceiling, this used to be the ceiling, a kind of beautiful plane of symbolism. This has become the ceiling. Maybe it is also symbolism, but it's perhaps not as beautiful. And we are kind of currently living in a situation where previously we knew what the ceiling was, a kind of thin membrane that defined the space. What the ceiling is now is a huge volume that is inaccessible to the imagination of the architect, and that kind of basically sandwiches architectural space. But it's very ironic if you look at this, that kind of a section of any building, maybe 50% is architecture and 60% is something else. And in Venice, we were able to actually represent that. A recently restored dome, we built a contemporary ceiling in it and had the kind of harsh shock of the kind of current situation vis-a-vis the kind of former beauty of the ceiling. And what this whole kind of project did for us, but I think also for me, is to shockingly kind of show how limited our knowledge is, to shockingly show to what extent we have resigned ourselves to a kind of debased repertoire of more or less mechanically produced elements that actually erase features and that in a certain way, in spite of their technical refinement, could be said to actually be quite primitive. A case in point is the window room, a fantastic collection of 200,000 windows. We discovered, we didn't have an exhibition of architects, but we discovered an enormous amount of people obsessed with architecture and investing in incredible efforts to maintain architecture or to invent architecture or to generate knowledge without being architects. This was one of them, a beautiful collection of windows which we kind of confronted to the ultimate window, the contemporary window, the universal window, which is here being tested according to the aluminum frame, which is here being tested according to the norms of the European Union, so that it doesn't break within the prescribed period. It's a very harsh contrast, but somehow our civilization has, without being conscious of it, obviously decided to abandon this world and to embrace this other world in the name of economy. And the effects are really drastic because for reasons of sustainability and also economy, our windows are actually becoming smaller and smaller because they are becoming so expensive. So this is a kind of irony where, again, for the best of reasons, we create rather frequently quite nasty little architectures simply because we are because our good intentions. And of course, that is the Achilles heel of architects. We have good intentions, but we are not always alert enough where good intentions lead. The corridor, in the same way, went from a kind of space of appearance and a collective space to a space of evacuation. So it became a kind of utilitarian tunnel, kind of without any feature or without any kind of attraction. And to counteract that, we showed the tunnel system that an English eccentric had constructed in the 19th century to connect all the extreme points of his estate, and built in that way 4 kilometers, 4 miles, 3 miles of tunnel. And that tunnel, of course, had to kind of change constantly character. And so it's an unbelievable kind of system where utilitarian tunnels can turn into sober, wide tunnels, can go up or down, suddenly turn into ballrooms suddenly curve and become an art gallery, and therefore suddenly become a kind of romantic exit into a landscape. So there's never been kind of such an engagement with the idea of a corridor, never been such a demonstration, but that is also kind of something that died without a trace. Let's look at the fireplace. The fireplace is, it starts maybe with a caveman and it ends with a toaster. We actually had the first place where Europeans ever made fire in a grotto in Spain. We had the actual site because it was a loan on a museum. And of course we could therefore, connect the importance of fire with ideologues like Heidegger, with aesthetes like Piranesi, but we could also explore some of the new thinking about fire and new thinking about heating. This is a project by Carlo Rotti from MIT, where the suggestion is that it is onerous to heat an entire place, and that we can today discover digitally the presence of people and then kind of project an individual heat shield on them, so that in effect you can heat the individual and not the space. Here we see kind of some of the example. It's not really refined yet. It feels as if you're on a counter waiting to be served. But perhaps the most interesting and in a certain way alarming one is a thermostat, and I want to talk about that later. Roof was a kind of very beautiful kind of project, and this was of course a deliberate action that we did in terms of avoiding the exclusively Western intelligence, but also looking at the intelligence of other cultures and nations. We translated a book on building of the 11th century from China, a period that China was expanding incredibly fast and also was experiencing enormous corruption. And we built the rules of a kind of perfect roof. We discovered through the translation the rules of the perfect roof. And then when we translated it more, we discovered that actually this was not a kind of lack of imagination of the Chinese to prescribe how a roof should be made for everybody, but a form of avoiding corruption, in the sense that if every person in the empire would make the same roof, obviously every contractor would charge the same. And there were even kind of initiatives or rules for value engineering kind of incorporated, and indications of which elements you could leave out, so that that could also be a kind of empire-wide activity. So here again, an unbelievable intelligence, much more intelligent than the way we currently struggle about the cost of building, already available 1,000 years ago, and kind of somehow not really kind of remembered, to say the least. For me, the kind of section on stairs and ramps, in other words, ways of taking you off the surface of the earth, were most touching and most interesting. This is a German born in 1922 who lost a leg in Stalingrad, and after that became obsessed with the staircase. And first started by kind of measuring all the staircases in an ancient German village, and then kind of leapt from village to city, then to state, then to country, then to continent. And the kind of detail that he studied is really unbelievable. For instance, where the steps of a human being kind of typically land, and therefore how the area of damage typically lands. And basically, based on this extreme amount of knowledge about the staircase, he wrote 50 books on the staircases in the world. And we were able to transport his entire archive in the Venice Biennale, drawings and all. So here you see almost the apotheosis of the staircase as not only a utilitarian element, but also element imbued with culture, with beauty, with content, and with all kinds of sociological and anthropological conditions. For instance, these are the different degrees of steepness that different kind of hierarchies could accommodate in the 17th and 18th century. So compared to this kind of thinking, I have to say that our own architecture is really worthless. And it is really a kind of shocking constatation, which therefore will certainly have an effect on ourselves, I hope, but I hope also on others, of kind of rediscovering and rediscovering the kind of challenge of this entity. I want to show the ramp. The ramp, there are two kinds of people that we featured, an American and a Frenchman, both born in the same year, 1923, so 1 year after the Staircase Man. And basically, I was wondering what explains this coincidence, and then I kind of realized that it was kind of probably the World War itself, because the Staircase Man had lost a leg, and the American had been kind of surrounded after the war when he was 23 with very strong but handicapped veterans, his friends from the army. So basically he began to kind of think what they needed, and so therefore Ted Nugent, an American who is still alive, basically single-handedly was responsible for measuring ways of handicapped access, but also made it a worldwide code, which is now an absolutely irrevocable and unavoidable rule of politically correct architecture. So it's really amazing that I'm sure that nobody in this room has heard from him, what an impact in architecture he can be. And kind of finally, this is the kind of correct steepness that he kind of finally found. The other man, Claude Perrin, is a completely other person, because he thought that living on horizontal planes was really boring, and that kind of if you would live on a kind of incline, it really was the beginning of a kind of excitement. And here he shows a kind of diagram of which different inclines human beings can accommodate, and basically 50 degree was for him the limit of human adherence. So basically. But I still am very convinced that this architect was also influenced by the war, and that kind of basically this architecture is nothing but a euphoria of the after-war period. For one is the war is a tragedy, for the other it's the beginning of a launch into a different kind of world. And here you see how he experimented with his own theories in his own house. I'm not going to go Bill Gates working on a toilet. It's not a really simple toilet, hugely complex. And this is the kind of ultimate toilet, Japanese toilet, where you have to program, and where the toilet also digitally kind of reports on the consequences of I want to end this thing with the digital. I said already, I think that architects are really naive about the digital and have kind of embraced it simply to extend their repertoire. But I think architecture will be definitely changing through the digital, but unfortunately I don't think it will be architects who are going to be in charge of the changes. Basically, already the smartphone is being charged with more and more kind of obligations, more and more possibilities, and many of them kind of will be architectural or have an effect on architecture. An elevator, there's no buttons, you will kind of control elevators with your smartphone. But of course, if you are taking any action on your smartphone, you're not alone, but it means that the smartphone knows what you've done, the smartphone knows what time you've arrived, the smartphone knows where you want to go, so you also contribute in a kind of big way to leaving a trace of data. There are already a Microsoft kind of project. If your environment knows that it's lunchtime, that you had spoken yesterday about having lunch with a colleague on the second floor, and that it notices that you seem to be now leaving your office to go to the elevator can be smart enough to take you without your need to operate anything to your colleague. The beauty of architecture was that it left initiative to human beings. And that real architecture, authentic architecture, increases the possibilities for human beings to take choices and make choices in their life. I don't want to be grim, but I think that it is really astonishing to what extent we are willing to abdicate those choices and surrender to a culture or a cult of convenience to which in the end may turn against us. Local warming is of course another kind of way where your footprint or your presence is captured. And perhaps at the end, let's look at Nest, a wonderful tool, by the way, very intelligent and very wonderful smart person, the inventor of the iPhone. The leaf helps you conserve, and so there you earn money. You see the complexity of the tool, but Nest knows you. And so it's a thermostat, that kind of thing. So basically, after saying a couple of times what you want, it knows you, and so then it preempts your choices and kind of begins to pre-program who you are. And so it's not a kind of surprise that Nest has been kind of bought by Google, and also not a surprise that there was a brief moment of confusion where Google anticipated ads in refrigerators, cars and more, and where Nest obviously didn't want to be the Trojan horse that would make that vision, implement that vision. But again, it's a kind of digital debate where the architect is completely not participating and an outsider and somebody who doesn't have anything to say on it. So I excuse myself for this kind of brief and almost caricature argument, but I have really enjoyed being in the school and working with the students and faculty of this school to work on generating knowledge in a certain way, but I think that this kind of relatively pretentious word, it's more that the school has been able to be an extension of curiosity and an apparatus that turns curiosity at least into insight. And that insight is of course not always welcome, not always compatible with the beautiful intentions that you have all articulated before I came on the stage. But on the other hand, I think that it will be difficult for our profession to survive and flourish if we do not occasionally take these issues and these changes and these mutations very seriously. Thank you.